Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Abraham, and I'm talking to you from Tel Aviv, Israel. And I'm so excited to be hosting this webinar, which is part of a series of webinars that's put together by Tel Aviv University and the Friends of Tel Aviv University. The title of this webinar is Making Healthy Aging a Priority Now. And you might ask, why the topic now? Well, we're certainly in an era of amazing change and so much exciting technology and medical advancements. And yet, all of a sudden, we've been faced with a little bit of a, wait, we need to sit back a minute and reevaluate what's happening in our lives. So I am honored to not be the expert on the area today, but to actually have three very different researchers and professors from Tel Aviv University. And as we expand the conversation, you'll see how different each one of them really are. The first, I'll just briefly tell you who they are, is Professor Yossi Shilo, and I'm very honored particularly to be hosting Yossi because he's my next door neighbor. In fact, we saw each other just yesterday. He's from the Sackler Faculty of Medicine at Tel Aviv University. We're then going to hear from Professor Sharon Toker from the Kohler School of Management. And certainly, last but not least, we'll be hearing from Professor Manuel Trachtenberg, who's from the Berglass School of Economics. So welcome, everyone. It's really, I don't really see you, but it is exciting to be here, especially because I know that many of my friends and colleagues are behind all of these black boxes watching us this evening. So humans have always dreamed of living forever. This is not something that we've invented. And forever might be a challenge, but certainly we have the ability to increase our life expectancy, not just from a medical point of view, but also from a sense of well-being. And with the new medical and other technologies that we have, more than ever before, it's becoming more and more realistic that we will certainly increase our life expectancy in the coming years in a great amount. But what we're less good at is actually redefining that older age. Is the quality of our life going to be better, or are we simply going to see the ills that many of us have as we get older appearing just being delayed by a very short amount of time? From a health and economic perspective, we need to ensure that we are going to be in better shape. And just when it seemed that maybe we were getting there, maybe we were starting to achieve that balance that we so sorely needed, we were thrown for a bit of a loop because now we've got COVID-19 in this pandemic. And in fact, these webinar series and the fact that we're sitting behind these boxes started just a few days after the pandemic was declared. So COVID has actually taken a bit of a twist because it's put a little bit of things out of control. We've had to redefine what it means being older. We're more at risk now. And perhaps for some of us, all of a sudden, when we didn't know when the end was going to be happening, we're facing more of our mortality at this time. And so we're having to deal with seclusion, and with a fierce enemy that we're not always sure how to deal with. So what we've done today is we've brought three eminent professors to talk about the concept of aging from very different perspectives, and you'll see that in a few minutes. So let me start with Professor Yossi Shilo. I call him Yosef Shilo, and I call him Yossi because he is my next door neighbor, and I will also very proud to be hosting you or introducing you because Yossi was one of the professors who recruited me to Tel Aviv University. Should we say how many years ago that was, Yossi? 24 years ago, very proud of it. And he's in large part why I decided to return to academia in Israel and make Tel Aviv University my home. So Yossi got his PhD at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's trained many places all over the world at Harvard University, University of Michigan, Rockefeller University, and not too long ago he came back from a sabbatical in New York City, and we're very glad that you're now with us here in Tel Aviv, Yossi. He has published an incredible number of prominent manuscripts in scientific journals. He is a member of the Israel National Academy of Sciences and Humanities. He's won many prizes, and to name just a few of them, the Emmett Prize, the Israel Prize in Life Sciences. He's won from the American Association of Cancer a prize for outstanding accomplishments in cancer research, the Olive Thon Prize in Natural Sciences and Mathematics, and the list goes on and on. He's dedicated his research and really his passion to studying a severe genetic disorder called ataxia-telangiectasia. And that's not an easy word to pronounce, but it's one that you have to learn if you're going to be your next door neighbor. So I've worked hard on that one. And what he's going to tell us about today is genome stability, a key to an extended health and lifespan. So Yossi, welcome. Really happy to see you here.
Pleasure to be here.
And I want to ask you, I'll start out with just a question, and then we can lead into your telling us more. Who are the enemies of our genome, and how do we avoid them?
Okay, Karen, let me first start with a quick reminder about our genome. So, as you know, our genome is essentially the DNA molecule, that 10-foot thread which sits in every cell in our body and is built of 3 billion building blocks, and its sequence is actually the set of instructions for what we are actually, for the fact that we are human beings, we're different from each other. Karen just mentioned that we're so different from each other. That variability is also there in that sequence of the DNA. And it is divided to functional segments that we call genes. And each gene is responsible for one or more physiological functions, most of the time by being responsible for the for making one specific or more than one protein in the cell. And the proteins are actually the cogwheels of life. They do all the physiological and biochemical, they actually propel all the cell life and tissue life and the organism. And that's what the flow of genetic information is, from DNA, where it all starts, when it's all written, and then going on to other molecules, and finally the proteins to actually do the work. So the DNA is a very precious and very important molecule, but the DNA is enemies because it's also a very delicate molecule, and its structure and chemical nature actually calls for trouble. And the trouble comes in the form of radiations and environmental chemicals, like environmental pollutants, and cigarette smoke, and all kinds of environmental chemicals, industrial waste, but not only from those chemicals, which are very strong mutagens, as we call them, because they induce mutations in the DNA, changes that we don't want. And they're also carcinogens, meaning they cause cancer, which goes hand in hand with being mutagens. But in addition to those environmental agents, there is also an enemy from within, and that's oxygen radicals, as we call them, byproducts of our metabolism that attack the DNA all the time, 24/7, actually causing in our DNA tens of thousands of lesions every day in every cell. So try to imagine your precious DNA being bombarded by all of these bad agents as we speak. So sounds terrible, but in fact, the DNA is protected, and it's protected quite well because evolution helped us to develop very efficient defense systems which repair these lesions very quickly, within seconds, within minutes. But they are repaired all the time, and you can imagine that this system is working very, very hard as we speak to repair all these lesions that are constantly induced in the DNA and threat to change its sequence, lead to genetic disorders, cancers. And I already can tell you that the variability between individuals in terms of how they can maintain the stability and the integrity of their genome in the face of this constant attack is one of the genetic determinants of the variability in aging pace. We all know people in their mid or late 90s who are sharp and bright and healthy, and that's great. And at the same time, people their early 60s already look old. So what's the key to this enormous variability? I don't think we know all the keys that underlie all the causes for this variability, but one of them for sure is the efficiency at which each one of us maintains the stability and the integrity of his or her DNA in the face of this attack. And the system that actually provides this defense is numerous proteins that repair the DNA very quickly. Now, proteins, as I said, are actually, in a way, products of the DNA. They are dictated by the DNA. So the DNA also dictates those proteins that safeguard its stability. Now, the DNA can be mutated and be changed, and even these very, very efficient mechanisms of constant repair are not 100% efficient. No machine is foolproof. So occasionally there is a mutation, and this is how severe genetic disorders are caused, and also cancers. One of the key to the development of cancer and its progression is changes in the DNA of cancer cells. Now, try to imagine now what happens if a gene which encodes one of these guardians is mutated. The guardian is not there, and we have a deficiency in the very system that maintains the stability of our entire genome. That, of course, might lead to very, very serious genetic disorders, but even the less serious mutations can cause trouble. And let me give you an example that I think almost everybody is familiar with. You all know about the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes, those genes, mutations in which cause predisposition, familial predisposition to ovarian and breast cancers. Well, the products of these genes, the proteins, BRCA1 and BRCA2, are part of this system that repairs the DNA. So here is a striking example why these genes and proteins are so important. But they can be mutated in other ways, more moderate, more minor, thereby causing more subtle defects. Now, try to think about hundreds of genes that are encoding these guardians. All of these proteins are responsible together for the stability of our DNA, for preventing those lesions and mutations. And they can be altered, mutated in various ways, because there are numerous little variations in our genome, which essentially make us different from one another. So in fact, each one of us, each and every individual, the same way we're different from each other, we're also different in the efficiency at which we maintain the stability of our genome. It's almost individual as fingerprints. And that is, as we know now, one of the genetic components behind this variability in aging pace and all the morbidity that is associated with aging. Obviously, this means that if we can read the DNA of somebody, and this is something we can do, actually, we can get the sequence of a DNA of an individual within few hours, and the cost these days is very low. We can get all this information and a lot more. And obviously you would ask, so can we do something about it? Well, let me go back to the example of BRCA1, BRCA2, for which people are tested. By the way, not only women, men too. And there are things that can be done, of course, checkups and sometimes other preventive measures. Can we do this more generally with regard to our morbidity and aging, which are sometimes associated very closely with each other? Well, in principle, we can. And every day we learn more and more about our genome, and the functions of new genes are discovered. And most important, these little variations in the sequence that make them work a little bit differently from one person to another are being discovered, and their functional significance is understood. And so soon enough, in the near future, we will be, when the sequence of our genome will become an integral part of our medical record, and together with our medical history, it will be very easy to read in our DNA and predict and actually tell us what is the efficiency at which we maintain the stability of our genome, which might be reflected in our aging pace. For us, for people like me, it's here and now. For our younger people, it's the future. But here comes a problem, and this is actually a subject for another talk, but I will allude to it just in 2 sentences. Because if we can read so much information from our DNA, if somebody else can read all that information about me, about you, about each one of you, including future morbidity, chances of developing all kinds of diseases, becoming very old during the 7th decade and not in the 10th decade like you would prefer. What does that mean? Can we do something about this? Do we want to know, to get this information? Think about this kind of information. This is a double-edged sword. It comes to a point where some of you might say, no, I don't want to know this when I'm young. Certainly, I don't want my young children to know that about themselves. I don't know other people to know that. For example, this could lead to what we call genetic discrimination in workplaces, in getting health insurance, and in other ways. So I just gave you a bit of the taste of the ethical problems that we're facing side by side with all of these advances. And the question is, as always, like it has ever been with science, with electricity, with atomic power, how we will use it, and how smart we will be when we actually use all this information for the welfare of mankind.
Thank you, Yossi. Well, I have another question, but before I ask you, I do want to let the audience know that if you have questions, you can use the Q&A and type in your questions there, and I'll see them as we're going along, and I'll be able to address each one of your, maybe not all of them, but at least some of your questions to our speakers. So Yossi, so you talked about the enemies, you talked about how we can even protect ourselves, you talked about stability, you talked about ethical, so you really, in a couple of minutes, you encapsulated it all. But we want control, right? I think probably one of the harder things, well, there are many hard things about this pandemic, but one of the most difficult elements is the lack of control that we had. And where there's been a lack of control is affecting the elderly. So it's been devastating to watch what's happening in nursing homes, and knowing that the people who are older are at high risk and they need to stay at home and they couldn't go out and they couldn't have the socializing that is important always, became even more important. So I'm a geneticist, so I also know that a lot of what we have in our genes is what we're born with. But is there something that we can do in terms of that DNA damage to prevent it, to delay it? Because that's going to be a big part of what's going to help us not only live longer, but also really improve from a medical point of view, the quality of our life.
Yes, well, when actually there are some basic good suggestions for everybody. And that's obvious. Keep a healthy way of life, and it all goes back in the end to our health behavior. Especially when it comes to preventive medicine. And health behavior is how we live, what we eat, what kind of life habits we avoid, and others that we adopt. And I guess that when this information will be available and will become available to people through doctors and genetic counselors, and people would know that they're, for example, a person would know that he or she are not that great in maintaining the stability of the genome. That obviously calls for probably more checkups, avoiding some kinds of food. I think it basically all goes back to what's called health behavior. And health behavior is, of course, influenced very much by people's personality. So there's a whole science now, a whole field in psychology called health psychology, which is not clinical psychology. It's actually the field that investigates health behavior of mentally healthy people with related to their physical health. So I think that that is the best we can do for ourselves. And with your permission, I would like to add just one quick remark, because you mentioned, and rightly so, COVID-19, and that takes me back to genetics. And if this conference would have taken place yesterday, I wouldn't be able to tell you about it. But I just read a new paper that came probably yesterday in one of the leading medical journals in the world, the New England Journal of Medicine. And this is probably the first robust pioneering study of the genetic association of the severity of the symptoms of this disease. We're all asking ourselves, so what's the difference other than age and background diseases, but what's the genetic difference between people who get this virus, are infected, and develop mild or moderate symptoms, and those who are in such bad shape that they finally need to be ventilated and all that. And this very important study, which was done on thousands of patients in Spain and Italy, which are two huge centers of this disease, already identified several genes in the human genome and variations in those genes that are in correlation with the mild or the bad symptoms of this disease. I couldn't avoid mentioning this because, of course, this is what, in the back of our mind, this is what everybody is thinking about.
Absolutely. So one of the questions we have for Murray is it worth taking antioxidant supplements? Is that something that can help? Will it have anything to do with DNA damage, or is it a superficial kind of a Band-Aid type of option?
Yes, this is a fantastic question, because you know, people have been aware that we have a problem with all those oxygen radicals that I mentioned, the enemy from within. So why not take a ton of antioxidants like vitamin E, for example, and others, and make it easier for our DNA and everything? Well, problem is that even if we take tons of antioxidants, usually as pills or something, they will never reach each and every cell in our body, and so we cannot actually really treat each and every tissue in our body with these molecules. And sometimes, as always, taking an overdose of these things is not good either. So I guess that the moderate dose cannot harm. To what extent it will delay our programmed aging, it's hard to tell at this point.
Yeah, and we don't have a control for one another. We only have the one person that we can be testing with that same genetic component. And this is related to another comment that came in, that there are lots of food items that are considered carcinogenic. One day we hear about this, another And how do you sort out the real from the noise on what is relevant and what's not relevant? You probably don't have a clear-cut answer on that too, but any guidance on how we can do so?
Yes, actually, here, we are on more solid ground because there is a very good documentation of all those chemicals in terms of their mutagenic effect on the DNA, which is also carcinogenic. And basically, we know that these environmental pollutants, industrial waste, all of them are mutagenic and carcinogenic. And there are already numerous studies about correlation of living in a very industrialized area and whole variety of diseases and morbidity. And the same is true for our food. In fact, we ingest some of these chemicals with our food, insecticides, pesticides, and all that. And so, yeah, I think there's this good reason, good justification, from other reasons, to use organic food and avoid as much as possible industrial food. Do your own cooking.
Yeah. Well, I certainly can take that. That's advice I've taken during this pandemic.
And I mean, this is common knowledge, and I don't want to go into all the details, but if you want to understand the reason why avoiding industrial food and why really take care and take a look at what you're buying in a supermarket, it's exactly these things, all of these chemicals, which can be like trace pollutants, but when you keep ingesting them year after year, they make their mark. They have an effect.
Right. Thank you, Yossi. That was fabulous. And we're going to move on to our colleagues who have joined us. And I'm going to introduce now Sharon. So Professor Sharon Toker is from the Kohler School of Management, as I said earlier. She's head of the Healthcare Management Program. She's also a graduate of Tel Aviv University, where she studied psychology and sociology, and then a PhD in organizational behavior, so very varied background. She works with the Israeli Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Law. And I found when I was reading about what you study, Sharon, I was really captivated because it seems that you ask such relevant questions for many members of our society, and we'll hear about a select group. But I've seen that you've asked questions like, why don't people participate in health promotion at work? How do you address burnout, mind wandering, and much more? And these are certainly tools that all of us can take, I'm sure also at Tel Aviv University. You have won countless teaching awards, so I'm excited to hear from you. I also want to just very quickly share also with you that Sharon is an illustrator, and behind me you can see one of her illustrations. So Sharon, thank you for joining us. And you're going to tell us about a concept that I have to admit I don't know much about: sandwich generation caregivers, costs, risks, and opportunities. So explain to me, what is sandwich generation caregivers, and how prevalent is this in our society?
Right. So thank you for the marvelous introduction. So I wasn't aware of this term as well, but I did experience it as a mother and as a child of my parents. And what I found out is that about 20% of our population is experience this dual caregiving, naming when you care for your children and for your elders. They shouldn't be especially ill, but if they need help, like with shopping and taking them to medical examinations, etc., then employees at my age, which is 47, but we look at a range of about 40 to 60, these are people that are still caring for their children, so children that are under 18, and also for an elder family member. And they actually constitute about 10 to 30% of the working population in Western countries. And interestingly, their numbers are only expected to grow in the future, given the increase in the growth in life expectancy or the aging of baby boomers. And especially now, following the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is because currently many employees are really struggling. They find themselves at home with their children. So school break, the summer break is on. And they also care for their elders, even if they're not ill. Many elders should stay at home, and someone needs to care for them and do the shopping and take care of medical issues. And these employees, which, as I said, constitute about 10 to 30% of the working population, now I guess constitute about 40 to 50% of the working population. So we're talking about a mass of employees that are really struggling right now. And we also know that any form of continuous caregiving may increase stress and mental fatigue and symptoms of anxiety and poor health and depression. So we know that, but sandwich generation caregivers are more vulnerable. So first of all, they experience depletion in time. They have to invest a lot of time in elder care and in childcare. Sometimes they perceive it as an obligation or a burden. They also perceive the caring for elders as a source of worry or anxiety, because oftentimes the illnesses are life-threatening. So my child was ill last week, as Karen knows, but I know that it's a flu and it will go away. But when you talk about an elder parent, so in our study, when we've asked people how many years have we taken care of an elder family member, they've talked about 3 years. So it's not a 1 week of flu, it's more like years. And we also know that elder care needs change with time. And as a caregiver, you face ambiguity because you don't know what to expect. And another thing we know about this population, except for the high financial costs, etc., is that they also engage in something that is called surface acting. So they invest a lot of emotional resources in caring for others, but they also have to inhibit their own feelings. So I can't, just talk to my children about how difficult it is to care for an elder family member, and I cannot talk to this elder family member which is sick currently and tell him how difficult it is to care for my children. So they really find themselves frustrated and with lack of support, especially. So what we wanted to know is what happens with them in the long run. So do they really experience a deterioration in mental health or in physical health due to this multiple caregiving? So that's what we were interested in.
And this seems to be actually an issue that will get bigger if you talk about 10 to 30% of the population, because as parents are delaying having children, so they're going to be older with younger children at home, but their parents, even if people are delaying that period of aging, as we hope, that will eventually happen. And so that it seems that the sandwich population may actually get bigger over time, even as we increase the quality of life at an older age. So what can organizations do? I'm at Tel Aviv University, you are as well, and we're constantly thinking about what we can do that our staff, our faculty, our students are doing better. And so those that are in this position, I know for someone who has a laboratory with 15 students, I don't spend much time dealing with their personal lives and issues. We talk about science all the time, but you seem to be in an area that you do cross that line, if you will, and you deal more with what's happening to staff and their well-being. Not that I'm not interested in their well-being, we don't go there.
Right, I know. Actually, when I had to decide whether to join the Tel Aviv University, I had two positions available, one in the medical school and one in the management school. And I've chosen the management school because I wanted to know how I can actually have an impact on organizations. So that's what I was interested in. And I think that it was a good choice for me because when we talk to employers and organizations, they often don't think about this population of caregivers. So they are more focused on caring for children, and they talk about work-family balance and caring for young children, etc. But they are not aware of this specific population. So just to give you some example of our findings, so we followed a sample of more than 1,000 Israeli employees for 18 months on average. And we wanted to see whether those who are sandwich generation caregivers indeed experience a deterioration in physical and mental health. And we saw that they have a substantial increase in depressive symptoms, and their health deteriorates over time, much more than caregivers of children only, or those who do not care for others or supply caregiving. And this was a bit worrisome, but the good news, as you mentioned, is that organizations can actually do something about that. And what they can do is, first of all, have some supportive practices. What we found out is that when employees experience that their organization offers some flexible hours or some time management interventions, or when their direct supervisor talks to them about these issues and acknowledges their difficulties, they experience this deterioration to a lesser extent. So we really found that organizations can make an impact, but they should be aware of this population, because it is really it's not spoken. Even if you look at the popular media now that talks about the challenges of working from home, they talk about working from home when you have children at home. They don't talk about the fact that you also have to care for others. And this is something that we want to raise the awareness to. I think it's important.
Yeah, I part of the working at home concept, there certainly has its pluses and minuses.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been periods now where it's been harder to get to work. And certainly, I think employees have to be more conscious about making allowances from in that aspect. So hopefully they will. So do you see it that an organization has a responsibility to, because in one hand it's getting into kind of the personal life of your employees and what they're dealing with. Is that something that you see an organization, the employer has a responsibility to care for, to be involved with?
So that's a bit of a tricky question, because it depends which continent do you live in. So if you look at Europe, and if you would ask me this question as a European researcher, I would say that certainly yes, and that's how the European Union sees it. And in the US, you would get sometimes other responses, because the social system is a bit different. So my point of view is that indeed, as managers, as employers, we have a responsibility. And if an employee experiences depressive symptoms and his health deteriorates, then he may not be able to perform his work. So even from an economic view, you have an interest to keep employees happy and lively and engaged. But I see it also as a social responsibility. So yes, as employers, we expect our employees to invest their energy and time and resources in our company. And we should acknowledge the fact that they have private life, and these life are often challenging. So we have to help them, and that's how I see it. That's what I'm trying to do, at least with the public offices in Israel, with the Ministry of Health and Law.
interesting, but I do think that there are cultural differences because I look at it, when I think about it, having been raised and grown up in the United States, as I mentioned earlier, I've lived here for 24 years, but I worry about it being an infringement on someone's privacy to find out what's happening on their personal life. And so, as you said, in different parts of the world, the culture is different and it can be accepted differently. So fascinating point.
Again, just raising the awareness that among managers that this may be an issue, and building this platform where employees can easily come and talk about these issues. They can initiate this talk and they can give this information, but they should feel at least free to do so and to share their difficulties.
Okay,
So
well,
instead of just asking them how satisfied they are, asking them what is wrong and what can I as a manager do to help them.
Okay, well, I've certainly learned a lot just on how I might change ways that I manage. Thank you. Okay, so Sharon, thank you, and again for that. That's just one little piece of art that I've shown everyone, but hopefully you'll get a chance. You can Google Sharon Toker, and you can see more of your illustrations. So thank you, Sharon. So I'm going to now turn to Professor Manuel Trachtenberg. And Manuel, you're very dear to me for the work that you did when you started the I-Corps, the Israel Centers for Research Excellence. So that was really a brilliant time. So Manuel, before he worked on the I-Corps, he did his PhD at Harvard. He's an expert in R&D on patents and innovation. I think many of you know he's had senior positions in the Israeli government, including being a member of Knesset. He's worked a lot on policy reforms, and as I mentioned, certainly in the area of science, you've made a tremendous impact in integrating research among and between different universities in Israel. And that was a very exciting time during my scientific career when I was part of the I-Corps system. So you're going to tell us about healthy aging starts at day one. So why misplaced resources? And as we talked already about life expectancy and how this poses a great challenge actually to our society, because are we actually prepared to deal with this longer lifespan that we hopefully are going to have? It's what we aspire to, but do we have all of our ducks in place to be able to deal with it?
Okay, so I'm very glad to be with you. Pleasure. Yossi, Sharon as well. Let me just give a sort of a background to answer this question. We now enjoy a life expectancy that, for example, in Israel, it's sort of over 82. In the rest of the world, it varies between, in the advanced countries, the late 78 to 85 for women in Japan and so forth. So that's an extraordinary achievement of humanity. Perhaps it's one of the most fundamental achievements that we can think about, or it's a kind of a summary of many, many other achievements. And we got there because of essentially two forces. One is the amazing economic growth that we have experienced since the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century to now, not in the COVID. Just to give you a sense of it, in the last 100 years, the GDP per capita in the world increased by 500% just in 100 years. So that's one force. The second is science, technology, and innovation, which through advances in medicine, in hygiene, in working conditions, and so forth, allow us to grow older. And these two forces have propelled us to this place. However, there's an amazing mismatch between those achievements on the one hand, and the fact that the institutions, the norms that govern old age, the way we relate to old age or elderly people, have not changed much. And so the most striking example of that is retirement age, the pension system. to give a sense, in 1935, when the Social Security Act was enacted by President Roosevelt, the life expectancy was, for men, was about 58, 59, and the retirement age was 65. So for most men, okay, they didn't cost anything to Social Security because they didn't get there, okay? Fast forward, okay, 1950, life expectancy is already about 68 for men, and retirement is still 65. So, okay, on average, you will enjoy 3 years, okay, of a pension. Fast forward to our days, and there is a huge gap between the retirement age, still in many countries 65, in Israel 67 for men, 64 for women, you name it, okay? And the life expectancy, which is much, much further down the road. Who is going to pay for it? How can you maintain it? Furthermore, demography, tremendous drop in birth rates, okay? Again, to give you a sense, the average number of children per woman, fertility rate in the OECD countries, 36 countries, is an average of 1.7, well below replacement rate, which is 2.1 in order to keep the population constant. We are an exception. How many in Israel? 3.1. Okay, so we're in good shape in that sense. Maybe for the wrong reasons, but we are in the good shape. Okay. Now, what does it mean to have an increasing life expectancy and very low birth rates? It means that the dependency ratio, the number of people not working that depend upon working people, that number is increasing. Okay, so you have, this is part, Sharon, of the sandwich phenomenon. You have fewer people having to support more dependents. Okay, it's exactly one manifestation of that phenomenon. That's unsustainable. This situation is unsustainable. We keep hearing about that for the Social Security, for the pension system, and so forth, but it's true in every respect. It's true, reflecting what Sharon was saying. It's true now with the COVID. You know, the fact that very many of the deaths occur in old age houses, homes. Okay, it's not just the age of the people. It's the fact that we have to say bluntly, in many societies, in many cases, we put away the elderly people. We take them away from their community. Okay, we dispose of them, and you know, they live longer, too good or too bad for them. Okay, but we don't have mechanisms to provide them with well-being, not just with longer lives, not just to have good technology, medical technology that will make them survive another month and another month at an extremely high cost, exponential cost, but to give meaning to those lives and so forth. So this is kind of where we are. You see, we are at a juncture where there is a collision between the achievement of the long life expectancy and all the rest, which doesn't match that.
So that problem that you point out, whose responsibility is it to fix it? Is it private citizens? Is it the government? Do we have to work together to make that happen?
We need to, as we say in Hebrew, to change diskette. You know, we need to change the way we relate to this issue. You know, first of all, you know, the issue of working is not just making a living. It's not just getting the paycheck at the end of the month. It's meaning, it's community, and so forth. We have a very strict, rigid system. You work until you don't, and then it falls like a rock. So we need much more flexibility in working arrangements. Take Tel Aviv University. Okay, I don't know how old you are, Yossi, I want to ask, but we know what happens, you know, when we reach a certain age. Okay, we keep working because, you know, for us what's written in the paycheck is different. It's written not salary but a pension. Okay, and we keep doing it. but think of it. I mean, it's a complete anomaly that it's structured that way, okay? We need much more flexibility in that sense. Yes, we have a culture that glorifies youth, okay? I have news for you. Being young is fantastic. Being at a certain age, it's even better because, you know, we have more experience, okay? We have a better perspective. We are not rushed, you know, to achieve this or that because we have already done a couple of things in life and so forth and so on. But society, the way society relates to young people doesn't reflect that fact, okay? So that has to be changed. Of course, savings have to change. You know, we have to start at a very early age. And of course, now I go to the issue of healthy aging. Healthy aging is a bit of a problem in semantics. Why? Because it sounds as if you do it, the healthy aging, when you are old. No, 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 no. You do, if you want to be healthy by the time you are at an advanced age, you have to start from the very beginning. You have to start, she was talking about what we eat, nutrition, exercise, community, and so forth and so on. This has to start at the very beginning. It's a huge mistake to develop programs for just older people like this. You know, you do whatever you want until you are 68 or 70, and then you realize, well, you have to stop smoking, start exercising, start eating vegetables, and whatever. No, no, it's too late, okay? So we need to change all that. And contrary to what people think, that the key is investing more in fancy technology that will bring the nirvana, the panacea, and so forth. It doesn't work that way. I think that what we know today, just the knowledge we have today, is enough to improve our lives at older age if we will change the way we look at it.
So it seems from what you're saying, we have to already start coming out with a dogma very early on. I mean, young people feel that they're invincible. Everything's going to happen forever, right? Maybe the COVID has shifted a little bit that idea, but it seems that, and I don't think that we should start scaring young people, but it seems that we should be getting that message across that the earlier you start, the better off you're going to be in terms of that healthy aging.
Right, and also,
I think you're
you know, it's scary tactics don't work. Okay, it's like like showing horror movies about smoking may have an effect, but you know, that in the end, you need to be much more aggressive about it and not just scary. Okay, I would say the opposite. You know, showing older people that manage to do what we're talking about as role models. Okay, and so you as a young person may aim at that, you see, may aspire to that, not be afraid of getting to that stage. But there is more to it. One of the ways to keep working and keep being active and have meaning is to acquire along the way very generic, malleable, and flexible skills that may allow you to keep changing along the way, to keep adapting to changing technologies, to keep contributing, because you can still, you know, at the age of 80, use Zoom, okay, or whatever. And this is something that has to be, that young people have to understand that you don't, you know, we live in a culture that glorifies also instant celebrity, okay? You know, shortcuts to instant celebrity. In Israel, one of the manifestations of that is exit. You know, you have an idea, okay, let's make a quick exit, make it back, and, you know, and forget it. No, you need to all the time keep investing. We live in the knowledge society, in the knowledge era, okay? So start very early to acquire malleable skills, keep investing in them along the way, okay? And then you will be able to enjoy a meaningful life at the other end.
So that's a good segue to a comment or a question that came from one of our attendees who asked, especially because Israel is such a major player in high tech, is there responsibilities for high tech companies to provide perhaps incentives to try to get into this game to ensure that we have a healthier life?
Absolutely, absolutely. Although I must say, there is this fixation with technology, as if, just, get the app, the application, and it's going to be fine. So yes, there is a significant role for invention and technology, okay, from, telemedicine that can be very useful for older people, particularly in this era where the COVID-19 era and so forth, and just alleviating the sandwich generation with all sorts of technologies. So yes, technology has a role, but what I like about the idea of incentivizing young Israeli entrepreneurs about this is that it's a way of changing your approach, is thinking about this stage in life and all the issues that arise as something that deserves to be, that you deserve to contribute to, that deserves to have inventions in it, okay? So it's a very positive way of relating to it, rather than the approach of disposing of you in an old age home.
Thank you, Manuel. That was very insightful. And I have to say that we're almost up on our time, and I could have spent 2 hours listening to you. So we're certainly, I hope we have another opportunity. I certainly am lucky because I know I'll have an opportunity to interact with all three of you. So really, thank you. It was captivating. I think also the variability in what all of you addressed, I think really points to what we have available at Tel Aviv University. And this is my time to tell you that we're actually have opened a new center for research on aging. And the idea is to integrate the outstanding and multidisciplinary research that we have at Tel Aviv University. We're going to incorporate also the tremendous work that's being done at the Segot School of Neuroscience, where they deal with a lot of the neurodegenerative diseases, particularly those that impact those that get older. So I look forward to interacting with all of you and many other scientists at Tel Aviv University and researchers so that we can address these problems that it affects every one of us, whether it's as caretakers, as Sharon spoke, whether it's about trying to fend off those demons of DNA damage and protecting them, or whether it's trying to deal with how we can reorient the way that we approach dealing with those people that are getting older. So thank you, all of you, again, for really a captivating webinar. And this is also another opportunity for me to tell you that the next webinar will be on Thursday, July 9th. It'll be at the same time. I can't tell you what it's about because I don't know yet. It's a big surprise. So that'll hopefully give you a little bit of suspense until then. And I will ask you and implore of you, if you haven't yet participated in the campaign that's called Drop Everything COVID-19, please visit the Tel Aviv University Association sites. We've had so many researchers, students, and postdocs who have really gotten involved in COVID-19 research. It's been pretty remarkable when you think that this thing has only been around for a couple of months, and yet there are laboratories and researchers that have completely reoriented the work that they've been working on all these years to address a really critical problem. And it's one that affects us not only now, but for many years to come, and certainly impacts the population that's getting older. And so I hope that you can all do your part and help contribute. Again, I want to thank you, Sharon, Yossi, Manuel. It was just a pleasure to be on this screen together with you, and I hope to see you very soon. And everybody, to the greater community who's watching us, keep safe, keep healthy, and keep a mask on. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.